Europe. Our mission is to serve our community at the university and beyond by supporting research, instruction, and dialogue, and by sponsoring vibrant and multi-interdisciplinary events that bring together our extraordinary resources of faculty, student, and alumni. We are committed to training the next generation of regional specialists to play leadership roles in setting the academic and scholarly agenda, making policy, and challenging accepted truths about how we study our rapidly changing world. In today's annual Balkan Roundtable that all of our analysts will be discussing, let it be said that the Western Balkans region continues to be turbulent and responsive to the geopolitics at play in the region. While it is undergoing an EU accession process quite slowly, China, Russia, and to some extent Turkey engages from an illiberal approach by these autocratic governments. The EU is certainly in competition with these autocratic governments and an array of players that intermittently engage with the region on bilateral agreements, but in other ways too. I would add that the U.S. foreign policy continues to pursue sanctions, most recently on Milorad Dodik's company this just past week. And not only has that occurred, but recent elections that took place in North Macedonia and Montenegro have resulted in pro-Russian governments. And in recent days, Dodik, as I said earlier with my colleagues, hosted a cocktail party celebrating Donald Trump's election. Indeed, Vladimir, our friend Alexander Vučić, announced that he had had a call with Trump and invited him to Belgrade. The Kosovo dialogues continue to languish and have made little progress toward the recognition of Kosovo by Serbia, and no one should be surprised, including the EU diplomats who ignore Vučić's statement repeatedly that Serbia will not recognize Kosovo. And in Bosnia, a new crisis involving the High Representative who has hired a lawyer to challenge the Kovacevic decision in the EU Court of Human Rights. Albania has had a recent splash of news when the government negotiated with Italy to hold migrants making entry to Italy in Albania. This was promptly rejected by Prime Minister Kurti of Kosovo. All of our analysts will discuss these issues and more. And I want to begin with Alek Berovic, who is a Montenegrin political scientist, civic activist, and columnist, and he is currently a PhD candidate at the University of Padova, Italy. Over to you, Alek.
Hello, Tanya. Hello, everyone. It's so a pleasure to be here with you. And in the last few days, we saw a bunch of negative comments on X and other media. And I think that's a great satisfaction to all of us and proof that we are doing a great job. And unfortunately, that those who are in power, especially in Serbia and Serbian entity in Bosnia, are afraid of what we have to say here today. So let's do our best and make them unhappy today. So yeah, I'm going to represent Montenegro. Greetings all from my beautiful country. And before 2020, Montenegro was an example of a country that is successful in its Euro-Atlantic path. Unfortunately, for 2020, when the powers who are backed from by Serbia and Russia came to power, everything changed. So in the last 4 years, we had several changes of government, but their idea, their goal, their mission is the same because it's motivated, financed, and created from Belgrade by Alexander Vučić and his surrounding. So yeah, Montenegro Montenegro has a bunch of problems, especially in the last few months. when openly pro-Russian, pro-Serbian political parties known as ex-Democratic Front, led by Andrija Mandić, who is Serbian ultranationalist and someone who has a rank of Serbian Chetnik Vojvoda, came to power, and he is now the Speaker of Montenegrin Assembly and basically someone who is controlling all sides of government. Prime Minister Spajic is not interested in anything that's not related to economy and directly with financial things. On other sides, Andrija Mandić is the leader of all aspects. Unfortunately, that is also reflecting to judicial part of Montenegrin institutions, because we now see some kinds of repression towards those who are not the allies of that politics, especially those who were involved in stopping attempt of coup d'état in 2017, especially when Andrija Mandić and his crew were tried for attempt of terrorism. And unfortunately, today we have the ex-special prosecutor who is in jail. He is there almost for a year without any reliable proofs for those like for what they are like putting on himself, and without any indictment, and they are trying to keep him in prison as much as they can. By current law, they can keep people in prison for 3 years, but in next few weeks they're going to change that to keep people in prison for 5 years without indictment and everything. So that's very, very, very problematic thing, because we can see that some prosecutors, special prosecutors who are doing those things, that there are like reliable proofs that they were also involved in corruption or in some kinds of cooperation with criminal clans that exist in Montenegro, or that they are in some connection with Serbian government. So those are just some of very, very, very big problems that Montenegro is dealing with in the past few months. On the other side, also one of the special prosecutors was targeting journalists, like 10 of them, that they are like communicating with people who are in jail, which is like totally unacceptable in democratic societies, that government and prosecutors are trying to stop the free media and their research about what's being done in that part of power in Montenegro. On the other side, we also have a very present influence of Serbian Orthodox Church, which is trying to divide Montenegrin society. There is like, for example, example of Montenegrin flag in one village where they got the idea to put Serbian flags everywhere in Montenegro to create a division among the citizens in Montenegro. And I learned also with the census that happened last year, but we had the results a month ago, where Serbia government saw that as their main strategic interest in Montenegro to increase the number of Serbs in Montenegro and speakers of Serbian language. And unfortunately for them, that was not so successful, even if they spent millions and millions of euros in that project. So I'll end here and we'll continue later on discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alec. Our next speaker is Donica Kamberi, who is from North Macedonia. Donica is the director for the Center of Peace and Transcultural Communication at the University of Tetovo, where she also serves as a teaching assistant in international law. She is editor of Freedom, a biannual journal focused on peace building. Over to you, Donica, and welcome to the Harriman Institute and to the Balkan Roundtable. It's your first time. You're muted, Donica. there seems to be a problem.
Is it okay now?
I don't see anything.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi and good afternoon, everyone. I want to express my sincere gratitude to the organizers of this roundtable discussion, to the Harriman Institute, and especially to you, Tanya Domi, for organizing and creating a space for discussion and debate. When I first got informed about the title of the discussion, I immediately responded with yes, because the title encapsulates the volatile yet very deeply interconnected issues that we face as a region, and I'm so happy to contribute my perspectives with such distinguished speakers across the region and US. In fact, there are a lot of things to be said about North Macedonia, but the big picture is that except the government, I'm sorry to say, but nothing has changed lately. I mean, we are debating the same things. For now, 20 years ago, we are facing the same challenges like rule of law and migration for 20 years and more. And somehow, at a certain extent, it seems like it's a lost cause, and we can do nothing about it. I grow up with the name issue. I grow up with waiting for EU membership. I grow up for European dream, and in a sense that it may sound very Darwinian, but in North Macedonia and across the Western Balkans, I think the fittest survive. And yes, this is more or less the picture of North Macedonia currently. In global scale, I know that we are living in very uncertain and troubled times. I think we are all witnessing what is happening in European soil. We know that the Western Balkans are waiting in line for EU membership for a number of years now. North Macedonia can be considered without hesitation a veteran candidate country for more than 19 years now, even though in 2009 the EU Commission gave us 13 positive recommendations saying that North Macedonia fulfilled the criteria. We were the first one to sign the Stabilization and Association Agreement, and yet, as you know, we are still held back by mainly bilateral issues, once with Greece. Hopefully, the problem is not alive, even though some politicians use it on a daily basis to raise the nationalist sentiments. And now with Bulgaria, which I'm quite pessimistic. The accession process of North Macedonia has been turned upside down quite often over time. And EU members, it's like they didn't have appetite and political fuel to reward North Macedonia for the progress it has that it had. And that's a very acute problem because while waiting for EU membership, on the other hand, we see that autocrats and autocracies are growing stronger in the Western Balkans. And Russia is using them in destabilizing the European Union. I mean, the vacuum created by non-involvement of European Union and US is exploited by Russia and China. And including the Western Balkans in the European Union, first and foremost is in Europe's self-interest. And sometimes with the students, when we discuss the EU enlargement, I think the enlargement in the very essence is a misleading concept because Europe does not enlarge, does not grow in territory, but it should be consolidated. And I think that the Western Balkans are in Europe's self-interest, and Europe must harmonize and consolidate this region. But as we can see, there is no political fuel even for this one. In regards to North Macedonia in particular and its EU road, I'm very pessimistic, as I said before, because of the Bulgarian veto. While in the other hand, in Skopje, we have a right-wing leader, right-wing political party led by Christian Mickoski, who told his voters his statement is very strong. He said that I'm not going to put Bulgarians as constituent people in the constitution, so we are not going to change the constitutions. constitution, and he said that I will negotiate in better terms than the previous government. I don't want to be cynical, but for now, ironically, the whole process, EU accession process for North Macedonia, is on the hands of the historians, of the commissions on both sides in Sofia and Skopje, to tackle some sensitive issues about history and historical figures. So Bulgaria remains an obstacle for North Macedonia EU accession. If you draw parallels between Sofia and Skopje, you can see that both of them are playing a blame game. What does it mean? It means that there is no serious negotiation because they keep blaming themselves about unfulfillment of the friendship agreement. And in this context, I don't see any progress. So I'm going to stop now, and we can discuss later about more current issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Donica. Our next presenter is Agon Maliki, who is a policy analyst, a civil society activist, and media writer from Pristina, Kosovo. He is the creator and co-founding editor of skunker.net. It's a really excellent blog that is attracting support and participation by younger analysts and budding scholars in the region. Also, Agon lives in Albania. He will address the current issues in Kosovo and Albania. Over to you, Agon.
Hi, Tanya. Thanks for having me again at the annual event. I'll start with Kosovo. The north of Kosovo has been the main flashpoint, receiving most attention, even beyond the region. And where we are right now is that after these tensions of the last 3 years, we effectively have a new reality on the ground, in which Kosovo's government has sort of more control over the territory. And sort of Serbia's parallel structures have almost been dismantled entirely, except for maybe education and health ones. And Milan Radojcic and his crew are out of the picture, at least for now, not within the country. But the situation, has created problems in that, and it has sort of, the tensions have sort of faded, especially after Williams Burns' visit to the region. The situation remains fragile because this came at a huge cost for Kosovo internationally, because it was done, at least Kosovo's sort of allies, Western friends, saw these moves as, Kosovo doing a little bit too much. In aggravating sort of situation, and right now we have a fragile kind of piece in which the local population is quite hostile to the institutions, and they have no representation because they're boycotting institutions. So it remains to be seen how things will evolve. Now, one of the key dynamics going forward is that Kosovo is going into elections, 2 sets of elections next year. One is the national elections in February, and then we have the local elections sometime in the fall. And this is now the key focus. We are in campaign mode. The whole issue here is whether the current government, Kurti's government party, will be able to have a sizable majority like last time, which is close to 50%. Or will it shrink support? The range is, I think, all analysts estimate like a bottom of like 35 and a maximum of 50. So, but what that means is that, will they be able to form a government on their own, or will they need coalitions, partners? So that's kind of the main question. And secondly, the other question is, will the Serbs participate? We have new actors in the north emerging, new political parties and movements. And most likely Serbian list again will now participate because Belgrade is now calling on Serbs to go back to institutions, realizing that it made a terrible mistake with the withdrawal. Once we have the elections out, then we'll go into the dialogue, which is basically in a stalemate. But for that, we have to wait until we have all the appointments, in the EU. Who's going to be the mediator? We still don't know whether Kaja Kallas will be mediating herself, or will she appoint someone to replace Lajčák. whether, what's going to happen to the government in Germany, who's going to be the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, or like who's going to handle, and what's going to be the U.S. approach on this. So there's a lot of these variables that are unknown. But what is known is that the external environment is not really friendly right now for what Kosovo wants to achieve. The key problem are the non-recognizers in Europe, which are moving in the wrong direction. Slovakia going on pro-Russian path, Spain now maybe unstable politically, and Kosovo does not really see what the benefits are to reach this agreement. We have an agreement, effectively an agreement has been reached. Where things are now is that we don't have the sequencing of who does what first, and who gets to be, and what will be sort of how the West will manage sort of in providing the benefits to Kosovo if it continues to implement what it has agreed on. With regard to Albania, I think the picture is a bit more optimistic because Albania has been decoupled from North Macedonia and its EU accession path. It now started accession negotiations, opens the first chapters, and now there's this discussion that Montenegro is sort of first in line, and then maybe Albania can join it as sort of a second front runner in the region. We had the new enlargement commissioner Marta Kos from Slovenia actually say that Albania could be sort of final, so could close sort of its negotiations within a couple of years. But here, so this is kind of like there's a new momentum related to that, but there's two big obstacles, and one is actually a positive thing: the rule of law reforms, which have gone a little bit unnoticed too much in the region. One of the key Western requirements for Albania has been sort of this revamping of the judiciary and the rule of law. They've basically built a whole new judiciary system with a lot of the judges, the vetting of the judges, new sort of prosecutive bodies, investigative bodies, and now you have indictments against sort of top leaders of the current government. Former President Meta was just arrested and indicted. Former Prime Minister President Berisha as well is under house arrest. So there's quite some movement on the rule of law. It remains to be seen whether they can sort of have a track record and follow up with sort of with them being found guilty or not. So that remains to be seen. And the second key obstacle is the elections. Albania is also going into national elections next year. It has always been problematic in terms of standards. But if Albania managed to pass this test, again, not very competitive political scene. The opposition is very divided and not seen as very competitive. But if Albania managed to have successful elections, then it might sort of again accelerate this narrative of Albania having some sort of path. Compared to other regional countries, at least it does not have any bilateral disputes or security issues, major ones. There are some disputes with Greece, but they are sort of the kind that could be overcome. Albania has some sort of pathway towards the EU. And I'll just end here, and we can maybe talk later about how the US and the European developments are impacting everything. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Dr. Ivana Stradner, who is a research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies in Washington, D.C., and she is also a lecturer at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. Ivana is going to discuss Serbia, and much of her work is related to Russia on disinformation and security strategies. Welcome back to the Balkan Roundtable, Ivana.
Thank you very much, Tanya, for inviting me. And I have to admit that every time during your presentations, by the end, I always hope that next year my presentation on Serbia will be actually more optimistic. But it actually appears that every year my presentation on the Western Balkans, especially in Serbia, is actually more and more pessimistic. Given what I have just heard from Alec, from Donika and Agon, I mean, I don't know what to say than just to continue this pessimistic trend that has started a few minutes ago on the Western Balkans because the situation is truly going downhill. So when it comes to Serbia, the situation is, as I mentioned, really going downhill for several different reasons. Number one, the European Union is currently fantasizing about bringing the Western Balkans closer to the EU related to the new enlargement process. While that is absolutely the step in the right direction, the way they are going about that in the Western Balkans, I believe that it's not operationally and tactically feasible. To begin with, you need to have a will. And you also need to understand actors who are in the region. I'll just give you a very concrete example. If you read carefully or listen carefully to Vučić's statements, he rarely talks about the EU membership. He talks about the EU path. And it's not a semantical issue. It's perfectly aligned with his preference when it comes to foreign policy that he has been trying to employ, balancing between Washington, Brussels, Beijing, and Moscow. So the reason why the EU has been very tolerant towards Vučić, on one side, because they believe that Vučić is the pillar of stability in the region, and without Vučić, there is no possibility that the Western Balkans can actually be closer to the EU. When in fact, President Vučić is the one who loves to escalate and de-escalate, and then to position himself as a source of stability. The second thing is, he's following purely steps similar to Vladimir Putin, because Vučić does not want to have actually the EU in the Western Balkans. It does not serve his own preference, which is actually to remain in power for as long as possible. And the second thing is, if you want to have the EU in the Western Balkans, then it also means to have democracy. And given, that what we have just heard from Agan about, the rise in authoritarian regimes and nationalism across Europe, Vučić is also following that path as well. So having democracy in the region is definitely not something that fits his agenda. But all you really need to know that is happening in Serbia right now, you need to just follow three things that happened just over or recently. Number one, you have massive protests again in Serbia after 14 people have died after the roof of a railway station collapsed in Serbia. And there are lots of intimidations and there are a lot of pressure on people who are protesting. This is absolutely not a surprise because we have seen multiple protests over the past few years, especially over the past 1 year, where the Serbian government made sure to stop such protests and repress people. It doesn't come, again as a surprise, because if you read the Freedom House, it actually states that Serbia is partially free, and actually they talk about how actually even media is undermined by the threat of lawsuits or criminal charges against journalists, that they're going after people, including what they write on their website, journalists, university professors, civil society, etc., who face actually smear campaigns in pro-government media outlets for basically criticizing the government. So I'm not absolutely surprised. The second thing is, let's not forget that a few years ago, the Russian government provided Serbia with a so-called regime preservation package. In other words, what they claim to protect Serbia from color revolution, which is a typical Russian strategy they have employed in places such as Georgia, for example. So I have no doubt, why the Serbian government is currently going after any opposition. But it doesn't end there. The situation in Serbia is very complex also when it comes to foreign policy, because what has just happened, for example, this morning, I read actually that Serbia and China reportedly they signed an agreement on the drone maintenance cooperation. So basically there is more China military foothold in Serbia. Let's not forget that China also sent air defense systems to Serbia, and they're cooperating exponentially, but also the Chinese prime minister met with the Serbian prime minister just recently, and I can go on and on. It doesn't stop there, because Serbia has very, very close ties to Russia, both militarily, culturally, economically, because Russia has all leverage to blackmail the government through gas supplies and energy more broadly. But just this morning, RT actually has announced the opening of a new media platforms in Serbia, which tells you also all you need to know about close Russia-Serbia ties. What we have just seen recently, yes, even though that President Vučić reportedly hasn't seen Vladimir Putin for a long time, it doesn't matter, because he's operating through people such as Vulin, or in Bosnia and Herzegovina through through Dodik, who actually are oftentimes in Moscow and are meeting with the government official over there, while Vučić can always claim it has nothing to do with me. I'm the pillar of stability. I'm in the middle, etc., etc. So that also, tells you a lot about how Vučić is trying to balance this approach. But I would not even call it a balancing approach, which is something that often we are going to hear in media. I actually think it's a very clear approach that he's just waiting for the right political moment to align himself with the new axis of evil coming from Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. While in the meantime, he's using deception to portray himself as someone who wants to be aligned with the West. Of course, the West has abandoned the deep belief and effort to preserve democracy in the region. Let's call a spade a spade. So with the latest lithium deals that they have, they are trying to appease the government, of course, in Serbia, with more investments, et cetera, et cetera. But if you actually read carefully the IRI report, they asked recently, what should our country's foreign policy course be? In Serbia, they said only 10%, only pro-European Union in the West. And then they asked the following question: in your opinion, our country's future is best served by having what kind of relationship with NATO? In Serbia, only 3% of people actually support membership, but also 46% of people think like that Russia is the most important ally for Serbia. That is actually very disturbing, because to change the environment, moving towards the West, you actually have to start first and foremost shifting in the information space. And that's why I firmly believe that this whole point talking about information warfare, it's not some a random propaganda. This is a purely military and intelligence tool that shapes the environment. And to bring people closer to the West, you need to prepare them for that. And I have to tell you, I read very closely Russian and Serbian media, but also like a Serbian media in terms of their daily propaganda outlets. And I have to tell you, I do not see a lot of pro-Western news articles. So, and the fourth pillar of this whole thing, what we have just heard from Alek, but also Donika in detail, how actually the Serbian government is using its hybrid warfare activities to completely occupy the space in a neighboring country and to maintain strong relations and strong foothold without a single bullet. So to conclude, Serbia doesn't need any war, the one that we see in Ukraine. All Serbia really needs to do to accomplish its objectives is to use hybrid warfare activities. We already saw what happened last year in Kosovo. We already see very, very huge tensions, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, let alone the US intelligence warnings. So I'm going to actually stop here and answer your questions later, but I will actually just conclude that my advice for the West is to rethink that if with friends like Vučić, they actually do not need any enemies.
Thank you, Ivana. Wow. Okay. Our last speaker I'm very excited to welcome Ralph Bajrovic back to the Balkan Roundtable at Harriman. Ralph is the Vice President at the U.S.-Europe Alliance in Washington, D.C., and a fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Previously, he served as president of the Emerging Democracies Institute in Washington, D.C. Welcome back, Ralph.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Hello, my dear co-panelists, and warm regards to people joining us in person here to listen to us. I'm going to concur with almost everything that has been said so far about the situation in the region. I'd like to piggyback on something that Donika Kamberi said. She said that there is no feeling of any kind of realistic EU prospect for the region, or Macedonia especially. And Bosnia is, I think, the front runner in the sense of the feeling of betrayal by a lot of the pro-democracy forces in the country. And I think the EU is now, the EU accession process is now at a point where it is clear to almost everyone that there is no such thing as EU integration prospect for Bosnia, but I don't think that any of the countries, except for maybe Montenegro, will ever, even under the most perfect circumstances, join the European Union. Now, my realization after basically working in this field since 2003, so I finished my second master's in Bologna in EU integration in 2002 and started working in 2003. And my first steps in this field coincided with the Thessaloniki summit, the now forgotten, allegedly historic summit where EU was going to tell everyone in the region that they're welcome and that their accession is a mere technicality. 21 years later, Croatia and Slovenia have joined, and the rest feel like the door has been shut. Now, if I'm to be honest, my feeling is that the plan all along by the powers that be in Brussels was to never let these countries into EU. I think membership was never a realistic option. I think the illusion of membership was necessary to allow the EU to basically order the region in a manner which suited EU interests, especially the German and French interests. And what we saw, especially in the last 4 years under Biden administration, which, by the way, I'm going to have to be a bit provocative and say that I think that Biden's Western Balkans policy is by far the worst Balkans policy of any US president since as long as I can remember. And what they did, what the Biden administration in the region did, is that they, as there's a saying in the region, that they burned all the illusions. They basically took away the last remaining illusions that people had of joining the EU. And I think a lot of people, especially those who are extremely pro-EU, have now realized that even years ago, when, many years ago, when this whole process started, that the membership option was never truly on the table for these countries. And when I say this, I'm sincerely hoping that in 5-10 years' time, I'll be proven wrong, and that clips of my statements will be used as, as proof that there are people who completely missed it. Because I think that EU membership for the region is very important, would have as much of a positive impact as it had in Eastern European countries. I think some of the countries of Western Balkans could follow Poland's path, which I think was probably the most successful Eastern European country in terms of how it used the EU accession process, and then the place at the table in the So Bosnia is part of this regional architecture, of course, and I think it got the short end of the stick even within the region, because Biden administration has finally decided to flat out impose a government in the federation that they liked, and to basically empower the most anti-EU force in the country, which is Milorad Dodik. And they've done this in full agreement and cooperation with the two main regional partners of the both EU and the US, which is Belgrade and Zagreb. So Bosnia now has a government in the federation which is imposed, which is basically illegitimate. If there was any way to change it, would fall long ago, which was installed by usage of the so-called bond powers, the Office of High Representatives powers, with the full backing of the Biden administration and most of the EU. And then you have the pro-Russian government in the RS, which then, together with the coalition, the imposed coalition in the federation, makes up the state-level government with the full backing of both EU and US. And what I think makes a lot of people very angry is that it is by now, it's been 20 years. It is absolutely clear that neither Dodik nor the HDZ want Bosnia to go to EU. They do not want to fulfill any of the conditions. Their goal is to keep Bosnia where it is for as long as possible, and it is now absolutely impossible to deny that the Western alliance fully supports these actors. That our attempts, and I've spoken at a few of your roundtables, Tanya, in the previous years. It's been over 10 years that we've been cooperating, via Harriman and other organizations talking about this precise issue. We spent years trying to convince people in Washington and in Brussels that they're making certain mistakes. But now we realize that in all those years, they fully understood the consequences of their actions. It was us who did not understand that this was the official policy. The policy wasn't as bad as it was because they didn't understand the region. The policy was the way it was precisely because they wanted the outcomes that they got. The West wants Vučić. The West wants Zagreb to control Sarajevo. The West wants Kosovo where it is. The West wants Serbia to basically be a regional hegemon. And the West wants Serbia to cooperate with Russia. I mean, I think that Vučić has a blank slate, blank check to fully cooperate with the Russians. The people who are suffering under this policy are the Montenegrins, who've lost a lot of their sovereignty. Montenegro is a NATO country which, in many ways, is under fair amount of control of Belgrade, and as well as pro-Russian players. Kosovo is in a state of limbo, permanent state of limbo, I'd say. And then you have Bosnia, which is a de facto condominium of Washington, Brussels, Zagreb, Moscow, and Belgrade. So I'm hoping next year when we talk about this that we have a completely different view of the situation. But that's how I see things right now.
Thank you, Ralph. And for the record, I agree with what Ralph said about U.S. foreign policy in Bosnia. I've been a strong critic of the Biden policy, and I think its weak approach to the region now puts the region right in the bullseye of a rising autocrat in Washington. Now, I want to hear people's thoughts on this, but truly, this is a precarious moment. We've like all of you have presented, the region is in a state of crisis, depending on to what extent in each of the Western Balkan states. Of course, Agon made the point that Albania probably had the least amount of external problems and don't have any significant challenges geopolitically. But I think Ralph is correct about Kosovo and BiH. And full disclosure on the Kovacevic decision, by the EU Court of Human Rights and the High Representative hiring an attorney, a British barrister. Nobody knows where the source of money came for him to hire this barrister and go to the EU Court of Human Rights and challenge it, when the role of the High Representative is to oversee implementation of all civilian laws. And again, this Kovacevic decision is in line of 6 other decisions on the electoral system itself, of which the High Representative has completely ignored and appears to be working against the interests of Bosnia with regard to electoral process, which is fundamental to democracy. And full disclosure, I did sign the letter that was issued, the open letter by Circle 99, a group of academics in Bosnia, about the overstepping of the High Representative in this regard. But this continues a long line of these actions. I want to go back to Agon. What do you think about what Ralph has said about this is really the intended outcome with regard to Kosovo? It was just in 2018 when Macron weighed in and said, oh, no, we're going to change the rules in the middle of the game. And this is when Merkel was on her way out of the chancellorship, and essentially, they changed all the rules and basically threw cold water all over the Balkans. I think that's when the air went out of the room on enlargement. It was really a downer. And I want to hear other people weigh in on this. So, but Agon, first with you. And I'd like to hear what you have to say, Ivana, on this too. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I do agree that especially after Croatia went in, the EU did not have an enlargement policy. It effectively had a containment policy over the region, which means preserving the status quo. And even some countries that I think there's a nuance here. I agree with Ralph, but I think there's a nuance here that there are countries that really see it as in their benefit, but I don't think they care enough. So when there was the issue of there's a lot of horse trading in the EU between the countries that want enlargement and on various policy areas, nobody ever cared enough for this issue. Those that wanted to see it happen did not care enough. I do think that there was some change after what happened in Ukraine, that it gave a new momentum. And I just wrote a recent sort of piece on this, that it's actually, but that momentum is already fading again. I think we're reverting back to this situation in which we will see more containment rather than momentum for enlargement, because realistically, with this policy towards Serbia, you can realistically not see Serbia under Vučić join the EU because of its common foreign security policy and because of its democratic standards, which have eroded tremendously. That type of country, if the West is supporting that, and it's what it's effectively saying is that it's creating a country that is unable to join on merits, because they don't. Who would want another Viktor Orban in the EU? So in that sense, I do think that realistically the outcomes are not in favor of enlargement. There are absolutely, I think, friends of enlargement, some who would like to see it happen. But then there are, I think, also elements who benefit from having the Western Balkans almost become a little bit of a dumping ground for Western or European environmental, human rights issues. We now see, for example, Albania issue with the migrants and hosting migrants from Italy, or Kosovo is now doing sort of outsourcing Danish prisons, Serbia with the lithium. So it kind of, there are some parts of Europe that might benefit from having something that is nearby, but that does not, a territory that is nearby, but that does not sort of have the same governance standards. However, I would not necessarily fully just blame these elements within the EU. I think what happens is that even those that want to support enlargement sometimes have a problem because it's 5-6 countries with all these bilateral disputes and all these obstacles. So then I don't think we're also not selling a good story, and this is where Vučić comes in. in that he has been given veto power to undermine the EU path, not just of Serbia, but of the region itself. And he's using that veto path to keep everybody else hostage. For as long as the EU, and now especially also the US, allows Serbia to have this hedging approach, and I think now with the US kind of having a new administration, which might, not be fully aligned with the EU, but might emerge also a bit as a competitor. I think this kind of increases now Vucic's hedging ability between various powers, and then the kind of power that he uses to not just hold Serbia, but the rest of the region hostage. Albania as I said, be able to escape this a little bit because it does not have these, and it's a NATO member. That's why there is a slight amount of hope. But again, they've made the enlargement methodology so complicated, and they've included so many opportunities for member states to block that unless we see, and I think this is the ultimate test, and I'll end here. The ultimate test, if they want to restore credibility of the enlargement process, to make people believe that it's actually happening, is if they install the qualified majority voting during the process, not for the membership, because they will need final consensus on that. But there are now ideas that have also been embraced by the new enlargement commissioner from Slovenia, in which they want to at least avoid one single member state to block like at every stage, because this is what has effectively killed the process over the last decade and made people believe, and be very skeptical that there's actually a desire to bring the countries in. So we'll have to wait and see. I'm also quite skeptical. But there is this kind of, small window for at least one of the two countries that might sort of join some sort of bandwagon with Moldova or something like that, to at least move a little bit more forward. But I'm really skeptical this will happen fast or within the next decade. It will just, especially having in mind that with the kind of forces that are becoming more powerful in the US and in Europe, democracy is kind of getting out of the picture. And if we don't have an impetus for these countries to be democracies, then I think that undermines the EU path as well.
Thank you, Egon. Just hold a minute, Ivana. Alex got to go, so he's going to make a comment, and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. So I'll just give two short notes. One is regarding Montenegro joining EU. We start to have like a precise year. Everyone is speaking about 2028, even like Montenegrin politicians and European dignitaries. Is it possible? Yes, I'm optimistic and optimistical and everything. But is it possible with current government? I would say no, because we cannot say that Serbian proxies can lead us to EU because their goal is totally opposed. Because I think that Aleksandar Vučić cannot allow himself that Montenegro becomes a member of EU, because if that happens, someone will start to raise questions in Serbia, especially Serbian people. Why not us? Because like Vučić always says that Serbia is leader in everything possible, like from sports, economy, foreign policy, I don't know, everything. So people will start, okay, we are the Balkan tigers, he likes to say, why we are not a member of EU, and Montenegro with a bunch of its problems and small country is. So yeah, I think that Vučić cannot allow Montenegro to join EU, and the goal of current Serbian proxies that are part of Montenegro government is to stop that process. On the other side, I'll agree with Reuf regarding the policy of Joe Biden's administration towards Montenegro and the Balkans. And I will just give one example. Like current ambassador of US in Montenegro is entering her 7th year on that position next month, which, as I know, is quite a bit unusual for US diplomacy. Usually that's around 3 years. And she's entering her 7th year. So she was appointed by Donald Trump at the end of 2018, and nothing changed, basically. Like, we were so optimistic about Joe Biden and that something is going to change, especially in Montenegro, but nothing happened. So basically, I don't know what to say, because, I mean, it can be worse, but I don't know. So those are just my two short
I
comments
just want to
regarding.
add,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Alec. I just want to add, I think what's really becoming very obvious, although we already knew it, you know, for example, Serbia's role in the instrumentalization of the Serbian Orthodox Church in Montenegro is a big shift about undermining its sovereignty, and now the Montenegrin Orthodox Church has been completely marginalized. And that just shows you the oversized influence of Belgrade. So I want to go to Ivana to
Yeah, and
have,
like I've just add like,
yeah.
unfortunately, U.S. diplomacy did nothing regarding Serbian Orthodox Church, because they even
Okay.
like took their bites, because in 2020 the representatives of Serbian Orthodox Church were going to D.C. to say to U.S. administration, like in Montenegro, neo-communists want to forbid Christianity, and unfortunately, U.S. administration like accepted that note. Really like that. I mean, I don't know why and how, but it's totally crazy to think that neo-communists in Montenegro want to forbid Christianity, which is like totally, I don't know, but that was the note that was spread by Serbian Orthodox Church, and I mean Belgrade saw that Serbian Orthodox Church is their best weapon in Montenegro, like to use the religious emotions of the people to in political ways. I'll just give one single example, and I will leave. For example, when there were local elections in one city in Montenegro, the local priests said that people who voted for party of Milo Đukanović cannot come to liturgies before they confess their sins. So basically, also regarding the census in Montenegro that happened last year, Serbian priests are going to homes saying, if you do not declare yourself as a Serb, God is going to punish you. So
Thank you for that, Alex. I just want to say, I don't think this issue is fully understood, even in the region. And I think it's a real indicator of the hegemon of Belgrade in Serbia itself. So
Tanya, it's hard for me to understand that in 21st century, but that's happening everywhere. So
I agree. Okay. Thank you
thank
so
you so
much,
much.
Alex. Thank you for joining us today. And now I want to hear Ivana's thoughts on this.
Thank you. So even though that Alec has just left, I would actually like to pick on his last statement regarding the church and to build a bigger picture. So I'm actually not surprised what has happened in Montenegro, because if you observe the Russian Orthodox Church and the games that Moscow has been playing in Ukraine, in terms of dividing the church, in terms of just recently also Zelensky ordering certain limitations on the church, and how church has been one of the most powerful weapon that Moscow has employed in Ukraine, it tells you really all you need to know what's happening in the Balkans, because I actually wrote a piece exactly making parallels to what happened in Ukraine with the situation in Montenegro and the Orthodox Church. If you read Russia's information security strategy, one of the key pillars of that strategy, including national security strategies, what they call it protection of spiritual, moral, and traditional values. If you read carefully the statements by certain government officials in Serbia and how they're spreading this narrative across the region, that really also tells you how they shape the environment by polarizing countries. And Montenegro, you know, has been a very fruitful way for them to actually exploit those vulnerabilities, because Vučić understands very well, as Alec mentioned, that Montenegro was exactly on the right path to join the EU, let alone, you know, after he joined NATO. And of course, Vučić does not want to allow that to happen, because just like as Putin fears any democracy and any Western involvement and any Western alignment with neighboring countries close to Russia, that's exactly why Vučić also does not want to allow any of those countries to prosper. And that's, number one thing. The second thing, speaking of parallels, we should actually pay more attention to what's happening in Georgia, because what is happening in Georgia, it tells you all also you need to know about democracy promotion and the EU basically the European Union priorities. Clearly, democracy promotion is not one of those priorities, and they're unfortunately falling into the tricks of the current government that has been spreading, disinformation campaigns. If there is no Georgian dream, there will be a war in Georgia, when in fact that's literally the last thing that Putin wants. But it's so easy to threat, currently the West with escalation, which is exactly what also Vučić has been doing by escalating in countries such as Bosnia and Herzegovina, or what happened last year in Kosovo. Make no mistake, this is not going to end. This is just going to continue because it clearly works. So the third pillar of this of my answer is, what about the West? So you're absolutely right, Tanya, when you mentioned Angela Merkel, but also Macron, who had this big idea, that Vučić could be actually, the pillar of stability in the region. I will tell you the ugly truth. That's exactly what the West actually thought about Milosevic in the early 90s, that he was supposed to be the pillar of stability in the former Yugoslavia, and that clearly did not happen. So having said that, we should learn, some of the mistakes from the 90s, and make sure, not to repeat them, because clearly President Vučić knows how to play the West like a fiddle, and to play into their fears of possible escalation. So the situation, on the democratic front is one of the great concerns that I have. But if the West does not believe that they should help the region and Serbia as well to become a more democratic country for idealistic reasons, they should understand that democracy promotion is they should consider that from purely national security perspective, because having a fully democratic region will bring also more peace in Europe. Because right now, as I mentioned at my opening statement, the situation in Balkans is going downhill, and the hybrid war will just continue. And I do believe that we'll see more escalations in the region.
I just want to ask you something, Ivana. Now there's the German government fell, and there's apparently it's been said that they won't have new polls until next year. I don't know exactly when, but you had an opportunity with the Biden administration, to reset policy. We saw what happened out of that. Very weak, very, very weak. And then the German coalition came together, and essentially I haven't seen them really be instrumental in a positive way or a constructive way in the region under the former coalition. And in the case of Bosnia, the best they could do is recall the High Representative to help promote democracy within Bosnia itself. But what do you think now? So now there's going to be new there's going to be new Trump government in the US. There's going to be a new German government. Allegedly, this gives possibility, perhaps, or not. What are your thoughts? I can't hear you.
I think it's too early to decide
Yeah. Okay.
what government is going to do, but I have to tell you that I would actually agree with Ro that the Biden administration was very, very weak on the Balkans. But if you look in general, their approach, the approach of appeasement, where they employed everywhere, And it did not work. That's exactly, something that provokes authoritarian regimes. That's precisely, what we also see in the region. Let's not forget that Trump was also the one who put Vučić to sit basically on a chair that looks like a kid's chair. He's the one who
This is true.
who just, appeased people. Yes, there was, purely the interest that he had, when he invited Vučić to see him just before the elections, but it's like a pure interest. And I do believe, as soon as there is some interest that he might continue, certain collaboration, whatever you want to call it. But I don't believe that the Balkans will be a priority of the US government anytime soon. But I do believe that really this is past time for the European Union to wake up and to do something. I mean, there are a lot of things that it can do. We can talk about policy recommendations about the Balkans, because you have to make a threat. What is happening in Georgia and Moldova and the Western Balkans, this is a threat. This is absolutely the same, a very, very similar pattern that we see with democracy sliding, with foreign malign influence, and how those countries are actually moving further and further from the EU.
Okay, I want to go. Okay, thank you so much, Ivana. Very interesting. Ralph, I want to hear your thoughts about new government in Berlin, new US government. What do you think may or may not happen? If you think you can talk about that right now, I would appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you. Before I answer that question, I would just like to reiterate what I said and what understandably the rest of the region doesn't see as important, which is that Croatian role is as malign as Serbia. A lot of people in the region do not see it because they don't, the Croatia is simply uninvolved, especially people in Kosovo who oftentimes are interested in cooperating with Bosnia and pro-Bosnian forces, but at the same time, the moment somebody from Zagreb whistles, they'll leave Bosnians to the side and go and cooperate with the Croatians. It's just it's a fact that they'll come and visit Srebrenica and say nice genocide, and then go off and do things with they'll use Bosnia's suffering strategically to attack Belgrade as much as possible, rightfully so, but will at the same time shy away from helping Bosnia overcome the Croatian malign influence, which I'm telling you, people in Bosnia are increasingly getting frustrated with the approach. Even some people in Montenegro, some DPS activists, the Đukanović party activists, are very, very interested in using the Bosnian suffering to advance their own interests vis-a-vis Belgrade, but at the same time choose Zagreb as their main strategic partner in the region at the expense of Bosnia, which is something that really frustrates people. But when it comes to the new government in Germany, I don't think much will change. I think people are hopeful. They were a lot of people were very hopeful when Merkel left. Because Merkel, if once books about this period are written in, let's say, in 50 years' time, people are going to be talking about Angela Merkel a lot, because with her arrival in 2005, things started going south, slowly going south. But she and her government made a strategic decision to pick Russia, Putin's Russia, as their main partner in the Western Balkans, and they managed to keep the region as away from the EU, which is what the Russians wanted, and to at the same time cooperate with the Russians on strategic issues. And I think that's the approach that Biden chose in the region as well. I mean, we have no proof of this, and I'm just speculating now. But my feeling is that people in Washington struck a deal. It could have been Kerry, who saw Lavrov a couple of times in Moscow in July of 2021. Could have been somebody else, but there was some sort of implicit understanding. There was almost no friction between Biden and the Russians in the region last 3 or 4 years. Very, very little friction. And the Russians seem to have subsided a lot of their activities, because they obviously realized that the West was not going to integrate the region into NATO or the rest of the region into NATO or EU and so on. When it comes to Trump administration, now that's I mean I don't think anybody really can even give you an educated speculation, because there's so much that, and we've seen last 48 hours, that is going to change in the US. I mean, we're talking about major change. I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that Musk and his new Department of Government Efficiency, right? Doge, however you
And there's no budget line for that, Ralph. It
yeah.
doesn't
I mean,
exist. It does
they're
not
just a couple
exist.
of guys. Him and Vivek are two guys with a big axe. Like each has a big axe, and they're just gonna. And I think it's entirely possible that U.S. Funds for democracy promotion are going to be completely
Decimated.
wiped out.
Yeah.
I think that USA and a lot of State Department, I mean, USA is under State Department, but people dealing with democracy promotion might actually find themselves out of a job as early as February. I think that the net is in danger. USAID is in danger. I think a lot of NGOs that receive funding,
NDI, IRI.
well, I mean, net. I mean, NDI, IRI are under net, and SIPE too. It's because look, Senator Rand Paul is going to be advising Vivek and Musk on cutting a lot of these items.
I did not know that.
Yeah. That's. I mean, it's on the record. I'm not. So, and we know what Rand Paul thinks about democracy promotion and what. I mean, Musk has not said as much, but it is. We could see a complete withdrawal of any kind of U.S. support to NGOs, civil society, and so on and so forth. And that would be a seismic shift. I mean, I don't think it's possible to really explain what a big change that would be. So if that were to happen, Trump's Western Balkans policy is going to turn into a transactional effort that's going to be probably dependent on how Trump deals with the Germans, number one. Number two, how he deals with the Turks, because Turks actually are pretty important in terms. I mean, they are part of the region. They're the only big power, that's in the region, right? They're a Balkan country, and I think a lot of it is going to come down to how he deals with Putin too. I think those three governments. So, U.S. relationship with Germany, Turkey, and Russia is going to have a huge influence on how U.S. Government decides to deal with the Western Balkans. And I think it is not beyond the realm. If I was Vučić, I would much prefer Biden to have won the election. I know this sounds, very
interesting,
provocative, but Vučić did great under Biden. I mean, Zagreb did great under Biden. Everybody in the region that had any serious muscle did great under Biden. Now, when Trump comes in, I mean, even I was talking about the incident where Vučić was sitting at the kid's chair, right? He's a huge guy.
In the Oval Office.
He's like 6'6", and it is very possible. I'm not going to say likely, but it is possible that Trump, for whatever reason, Rigondeaux might show up, might not. You might have people coming over from State Department that used to deal with the region that were, hawks, like people around Rubio, for example, might just go in and just decide to go really hard on Vučić, and might really go hard even on Rama. I think Rama is also not exactly safe, because I think Agon was talking about the prosecutions in Albania. I'm not so sure that the government in Albania really knew about these prosecutions ahead of time. It is not, because Berisha has been going, some people in the name Berisha's name are going around Washington saying that Berisha is just one of many victims of Democrats' abuse of rule of law, with the sanctions and so on and so forth. And you have this case against Ilir Meta now, and anything is possible. I mean, we're literally in a kind of a 1980s Hollywood type, sort of low budget movie where people can, die and then come back, and carpets can fly, and it is a very, very unpredictable moment in the U.S. Western Balkans relationship.
Thank you, Ralph. Actually, I want to give Ralph some credit because he has continuously talked about the role of Croatia, its pernicious effect on Bosnia, and how Zagreb has used EU platform after EU platform to basically insult and override the sovereignty of Bosnia. Let that not be lost on anyone. But I want to give Donica a last
Thank you, Tanya.
word.
Can I just say
Yeah.
2 sentences?
Yes,
I
okay.
wrote
Then
a
I'm
piece.
going to Donica.
I
She's
wrote a
getting the
piece. I wrote a
last word
piece.
here. Okay.
I co-authored a piece with a certain Ivan Stradner about 4.5 years ago for the American interest, in which we basically talked about the idea of exchange of territories and said,
Right.
look, we don't support it, but to lay blame on Trump exclusively is just not the way to go, because this came from Mogherini and the EU, right? And a lot of people, especially me, I was very, very badly criticized by people saying, they were implying that I was somehow in favor of the idea of exchange of territories. But I think one thing that we can be certain of is that that idea is going to come back, it will come back to life.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again. Okay, Donica, I want you to talk about, I mean, my God, the region and how and your thoughts, your initial thoughts that you shared with us. Macedonia is a NATO member, in this situation. And I know you're very pessimistic for obviously valid reasons, but what do you think can be done with regard to its NATO status and getting reinforcement from pro-democracy efforts? And I just want to say, I actually looked up how Trump could or could not leave the NATO treaty. He can't do it. He's got to have a resolution, joint resolution, House and US Senate, with a 2/3 vote. It's not going to happen. Thank God it is not going to happen. But maybe NATO, it could be the last institution standing that could actually aid and advance democracy. Your thoughts on that with regard to North Macedonia?
Hey, can you hear me? Because I had some problems
Yes.
with them. Okay. The only good thing that has happened to Macedonia now and 20 years ago is being a NATO member, as we know, that resulted with PRESPA agreement, because it changed the name, because Greece required that. In terms of Trump coming to White House, I think that Western Balkans are not anymore a global problem. I mean, they have never been, but they are a sub-drama. They are a sub-drama and a problem concerning Europe. In regards to North Macedonia, U.S. Policy has been constant over time. I mean, they have always supported country pro-Western and pro-Atlantic orientation. Sometimes the U.S. ambassadors have been have had more proactive role, and sometimes more hesitant in their statements, but they have always kept this, how can I say, this narrative. Whether Kamala Harris or Trump won the election, it makes little difference in the context of North Macedonia. I'm not saying in the Western Balkans, but in North Macedonia, because I have been following their speeches. They never mentioned Western Balkans, not North Macedonia. So with Trump coming to power, we'll see less engagement, but we see this less involvement of U.S. from Obama administration and through Biden, Trump, and U.S. is involving less and less in the Western Balkan. But with Trump, as I said, we'll see less engagement, and because of his distrust on multilateral institutions such as NATO and European Union. But I would like to make a point. what is concerning in the context of North Macedonia is me with my colleagues as academics, we have worked recently on a report study about China's influence in the North Macedonia. And what we see is a growing influence of China and in strategic level, economic and ideologic. Because China's economic objectives are closely linked with the geographical position of North Macedonia, which is very important for the Belt and Road Initiative, which ensures China a fast transport of goods to the largest port of Mediterranean in Athens. A crucial point that I would like to make is also, maybe it's not very important, but in this context, it is yes. In the university in Skopje, St. Kyrillian Methodi, there is a Confucius Institute that operates and holds the monopoly of education in Chinese language. I don't have anything against the different cultures, but taking into account that the curriculum and the educational materials are prepared by the Chinese government and strictly reflect the state stance and leaving no room for critical thinking. And what is important to mention is that in 2013, there were 60 students, and now we have 600. So
Wow.
there are some crucial points that I would like to have another roundtable just for China influence in the Western Balkans, and I will particularly explain.
Well, we can talk about that. We can talk about that. I just want to say, we're coming to the end. Egon, do you have anything else to say that in response to anybody that said anything about Kosovo?
Well, I could have but like a minute or two, but like if you have.
Just very quickly.
Sure. No, I'll just want to say that, at least my reading of Trump is that, he seems to be pursuing more of a MAGA agenda domestically. And, considering the appointments, it will be more of a traditional, at least on the foreign policy front, more traditional. I think they will look at the region. We're such a marginal item there through the prism of the relations with the EU and the trade relations. If there's like a dispute with the EU over trade, that could impact how the US acts in the region, maybe as more of a competitor rather than sort of an ally. They will look at it through the prism of China and through the prism of Russia's ability to cause trouble. And what I would say is that, while yes, democracy will be out of the picture, I don't think they will still have the instruments and the ability to eliminate all of the infrastructure that is there for democracy support. But what I think they will do is they might change the approach against countries that are hedging. So, and that includes maybe Serbia. So, people are, happy that Trump won, or in Kosovo saying, well, Trump is, maybe good for us. And, they're trying to read, ultimately Trump is a Russian newspaper called him an unguided missile. You never know where it's going to fall. But I think it will be bad for whoever fails to fall in line with what they think that has to be done. And I think it's still too early to kind of see what that is. It will a lot depend on sort of US-EU relations, US-China relations, and it'll take about a year for those things to get clarified, and then we'll get to the Balkans and how they will approach it. So I'll just end with that.
Well, don't discount the fact that his son-in-law and daughter are, have their investment in Albania, and he'll probably keep his eye on Albania out of self-interest for his family. Ivana, your comment?
So I would just like to emphasize, once again, that it's, I think, too early really to discuss how Trump is going to perceive the Balkans, because he hasn't even fully formed his cabinet. And he has, as I mentioned, a long history of being an unpredictable leader. So that's also something we should play into account. I think, having Mark Rubio is a step really in the right direction that gives me, some hope. But I also absolutely share my concerns with Ralph that what we might actually see during this administration is completely divorced from the human rights, basically spreading human rights globally and helping other countries to be more democratic. And that is actually more problematic to me than anything else, because that's how you actually build authoritarian regimes. And as I mentioned, just look what's happening in Georgia, what almost happened in Moldova, and the Western Balkans is unfortunately clearly on a very, very similar trajectory, especially Serbia, following Georgian steps. So, and my last point to that is, I'm not trying, to claim that Biden was so bad, but Trump will be fantastic. No, the Biden administration had a very, very low bar for success. And that's how they measure, their success. They believe that Vucic sent weapons to Ukraine, according to some reports. Okay, fine, but it's not because of ideological reasons. It's also because it's purely also economically benefited the government and other people. But we should also talk about that Serbia did not impose sanctions on Russia, and that Serbia serves as a sanction invasion, basically place that is allowing Russia to operate freely in the country. So I'm not actually sure that is a success of this ongoing administration, the Biden administration.
Okay, well, I'm going to have the last word since I'm the moderator. And here's what I want to say about the Trump administration. Given the statements in the history of Waltz, who's been named the national security advisor, and Marco Rubio himself, I believe that they're both hawks on China and Iran. And I do think that Trump's lack of interest on the situation in Europe and his dissing of NATO over time, I don't think he'll be able to withdraw, but he may ignore NATO. He may not send an ambassador. He may not invest in NATO. Who knows? We'll see. But I do believe the foreign policy of this administration is going to shift towards China, because they really do see China as a major economic threat to the United States. And I actually believe that's more or less valid. But I would also add that they've been, Rubio and Waltz have been very clear about their views on Iran and China. And I think there's going to be a shift. I do. I think it's highly possible. I'm looking into my crystal ball. Thank you all. Thank you all for your contributions today. And you know what? I think Donica made a great recommendation. We should all get back together and have a roundtable on the influence of China in the region. I actually like that idea. I'll come back to all of you soon. Everybody have a great day wherever you are. Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Eileen.
Hey, Tanya, call me.
Don't you think it was good?
Yeah, it was great. There's still people on the